we go. And as our participants filter in, Nancy, you can feel free to start with the welcoming intro.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the fall semester of our virtual lecture series. If you're joining us for the first time, we greatly appreciate your support and interest in participating. My name is Nancy Simpson. I am Board Secretary with Gateway Centre of Excellence in Rural Health. Gateway is located in Goderich, Ontario, and to our knowledge is the only rural health research centre in Canada governed by community-based volunteers. Partnered with several academic centres and healthcare facilities, our mission is to improve the health and quality of life of rural residents through research, education, and communication. Through this lecture series, we hope to promote a culture of rural health knowledge and innovation. We're kicking off a new semester with today's presentation entitled Cultivating Memories, a Community Gardening Project. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Sage Milne. She is a research assistant with Gateway. Besides playing key roles in other research initiatives, Sage has been involved with this particular Cultivating Memory project for 2 summers now. She has a degree in global health studies. Sage has a passion for photography, and she has documented many of Gateway's activities during her time with our organization while updating our social media releases on a regular basis. We're pleased to welcome 3 panelists with Sage today. Betty Hendricks is president of the Goderich and District Horticultural Society. She has worked as a registered nurse for over 47 years, and since retiring from full-time work in 2016, Betty has worked on a contract basis for Fanshawe College's PSW program, and for over 2 years has worked administering vaccines for the Huron Perth Health Unit. Betty founded the Huron County Museum Garden and the Huron Historic Jail Garden that both supply local food banks with fresh produce and educate visitors on local gardening traditions. Michele Melady-Young serves as a board member here at Gateway. She has enjoyed a successful nursing career in both Canada and the United States before returning to her roots in Huron County. Michele has always found great joy in the garden, and since 2016, she has held the designation of Master Gardener, providing the public with relevant, evidence-based horticultural information and with particular interest in the areas of vegetables and native plants. Ruby DeBrouwer is a recreational manager at Harbour Hills Retirement Community here in Goderich. She studied at Brock University, earning an undergraduate degree in community recreation, and then earning a master's degree with a specialization in community sport. Ruby was directly involved with this year's Cultivating Memories project at Harbour Hill. Thank you, Sage and panelists, Michele, Ruby, and Betty, for your time and insight today. I'll pass it back to you now, Sage, to begin your presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. Can I get a confirmation that other people can view it, please? Okay, excellent. So good afternoon. As Nancy said, my name is Sage Milne, and I'm a research assistant and a project lead at Gateway Centre of Excellence in Rural Health. I'm lucky to be joined by such an expert panel of skilled gardeners and recreational specialists who can really add to the discussion. This year, I had the amazing opportunity to lead a project, Cultivating Memories, wherein Gateway added raised accessible garden beds to long-term care facilities and retirement residences within Huron County. The goal of this project was to promote health and well-being of residents within these locations. You might not see a close connection between community gardens and good health and well-being, but I hope by the end of my discussion, you will really understand how linked they are. To approach this project, I want to introduce everyone to the socio-ecological model of health. This is one of the approaches that public health, your doctor, and Gateway may take to understanding health. This approach understands that there are both individual decisions and broad complex factors that really influence your health behaviors and thus your overall health and well-being. To explain, as an individual, you might take on certain healthy behaviors and choices that impact your health, such as exercising regularly and eating a balanced diet. The interpersonal level is all about family, your social network, and how those have an impact on your health. These are people that provide social support and barriers for your interpersonal health. A bit broader, institutional organization include rules and regulations and informal structures that constrain or promote health behaviors. Community factors are informal or formal social norms that influence your health. And then most expansive are the societal factors, how policy impacts our health, such as the Canadian Healthcare Act, shaping how we access healthcare. So for the purposes of the project, we are focusing on a range from the individual to the community level, such as enabling people to have the choice to garden, having the opportunity for social and peer support to happen as residents come together to garden. This scales up to transform, to put a focus on the community level, creating opportunities and support within the broader community of gardening in these locations and the ability to cultivate healthy behaviors. So really, how does gardening become a healthy behavior for Huron County residents? As a more general background, Huron County, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, is a rich agricultural hub with over 2,500 census farms, the second most dense farming location in Ontario. A lot of people have grown up on a farm, among farmers, or had a garden growing up. There's an enormous amount of expertise and ability within this area of production. And people may have been gardening and growing all their lives. And we're also an aging population with over 25% of our population over the age of 65. To promote a healthy community, we need to be an accessible community for people of a wide array of ages. And I think, there we go. The transition as well of living in a new environment can be difficult. When somebody moves into a long-term care facility and retirement residence, they may not have the same control over in their environment and what they had when they were living at their home. There may be different rules and the space is arranged in different ways, and you may no longer able to grow your crops as you did for years. And as you age, your capacity to do the same activities also changes. Over 1/3 of women, 38%, and 36% of men age 65 plus had at least two of the most common chronic conditions. This may include chronic conditions that impede your mobility and require a wheelchair or a walker, or require you to do lighter activities. Although in retirement residence, you may see a wider range in capacities, one of the eligibility requirements for long-term care is that you require assistance with activities of daily living. So capacity to do activities changes. And then living in a retirement residence or an LTC may also change how you relate to family members, friends, and your community. Family members may no longer able to visit you the same way and provide the same support. Your previous social circle may change in a positive way as you're able to interact with others in a shared activity space, but you might not also be able to connect with other community members that you've always done in the same way. One of the residents, when we were talking, described that part of the reason why she moved to a retirement residence was because of life changes, such as losing a spouse. The context of COVID has also redefined relationships of others within these spaces. There was a decrease in contact with unpaid caregivers, such as families and friends, during the first two waves of COVID, and COVID resulted in changes in care provided, and it can lead to greater isolation from interpersonal relationships. It is important to note that although the context of COVID is huge, it's not just a one-time thing. Seasonal flu outbreaks and continued waves of COVID continue to restrict access to these facilities during different times of the year. And isolation from those interpersonal connections can take a burden. The Cultivating Memories project, and that's Alexa in the photo. She was helping me this entire year make it all possible. It was developed as a result of this context. Gateway added raised accessible garden beds. In total, we added 18 raised garden beds to a total of 6 places in Huron County. The first year, thanks to the funding by the Libro Credit Union and Canadian Healthy Communities Initiative, we added raised garden beds to Huron View, Huron Lee, Goderich Place, and Blue Water Rest Home. And we actually had the wonderful support by Kevin Kale, who constructed 12 garden beds for that year. The following year, thanks to the funding from the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, we added garden beds to Harbour Hills and Braemar in Wingham. And this past year, we also had a donation of plants from the Goderich and District Horticultural Society to really make this project possible. There's a lot of small elements that go into the project, but I like to visualize the timeline in a different way. So summer 2022 was my first year here. Sam, who's right behind me, was the project lead. And the first year I assisted adding dirt to the garden. And then the next year I was the project lead, and it was research assistant Maitland's first day. If you can't tell, she's the one that happens to be wearing business clothes. And I brought her to Harbour Hills and Goderich to shovel some dirt. So it was a great experience. And really, for a full timeline of this project for this past year, I want to emphasize that there's a lot of little details that go into it. You have to understand there's a community need, and we write grants. We connect, plan, and facilitate and promote the project within the facilities, and to family members who have family in those facilities. But one thing I want to focus from this timeline is reflection, and what we can see are the results of this project. So when we talk about gardening, gardening is a fun activity that you do, a way to grow your own food. It's a way to beautify your neighborhood. It's a way for you to take care of the environment and yourself, a way for you to take care of others with food and company. It's a learning process. Gardening has material and immaterial transformation that happens for you. It's all these different values that are combined. And if we take it from the socio-ecological model of health, community factors are the informal or formal social norms that influence your health. So when we take on this project, we're changing a norm. We're saying that, hey, we can all garden. We can think of it transforming the value of gardening within our communities and creating opportunities instead of barriers for people to use gardening as a behavior, something they do. They can get involved. There's more opportunities available. And community gardening is a way to transform the space, both material and immaterial, for yourself and others. And benefits of gardening to an individual can be seen from a broader perspective. So access to green space, that's something we can see right away. Some known benefits from the increased access to green space include improved levels of mental health, physical fitness, cognitive and immune function. And there's also greater impact on populations that experience health inequities, such as older adults. Not all green spaces in our communities are built to accommodate a wide range of ability. So creating those accessible green spaces can promote physical activity, contribute to that social interaction and cohesion, increase access to healthy food that would not otherwise be possible. And in our case, the garden beds were made to be accessible, as raised garden beds allowed people that are in a walker or wheelchair or just have limited mobility to also participate in the process. So strawberries and green onions, for example, were picked right out of the garden for people, so they were able to enjoy what they made for themselves. And then I know that Ruby, for example, could speak in a greater detail about this, but activities involving gardening do not need to be limited to digging in dirt and planting. You can also have the option to walk outside and enjoy the garden as a method of physical fitness. This also allowed greater control over that green space. In places that have a garden, I remembering going to one place and we allowed all the residents to pick out exactly what they would like to grow. One garden bed, I didn't see any plants. And when we talked to one of this woman for a reflection phase, she dug right into the garden and pulled up a potato. And that entire garden bed, which I just saw as dirt, they had a bunch of potatoes growing under there, and some of them would take it up and they would boil them and they would have it as a snack. And in other locations, they decided that black-eyed Susans were a much needed plant, or they would like to grow some beans and radishes. Many wanted to grow strawberries. So there's a lot of control and ability that goes into determining what you want to be arranged in those garden spaces. And depending on the different places we went, they were able to reap the benefit in different ways. For example, one location used tomatoes they grew in their garden and made a pasta sauce as a shared activity. So having access to that food from that green space can be a very empowering activity and transform your living situation. And speaking more broadly, community gardens have been a way for communities to reclaim control over urban and rural space and their own health. The best example would be Detroit and efforts to reclaim space with community gardens to feed themselves and keep themselves happy. With this example, I'm highlighting that different community gardens can serve different purposes for people to increase their health and well-being through having that access to green space. So the other thing is that narrowing down again on the Cultivating Memories project, it has been said that access to green space has positive cognitive and social benefits. In a study from Australia, they found positive results when they were looking at the impact of gardening on older adults. They're connecting with other members of a gardening group allows people to receive social support and contribute positively to the lives of each other, which is an important protective factor against isolation and loneliness. When we went to interview residents, they were able to express pride and satisfaction with the results. You can see on the screen throughout the slideshow, I've been showing you a lot of the photos of the garden spaces. So this is one of the residents who's showing Alexa that they're growing all these wonderful plants. And then this also allows them to connect to family members and receive support for what they're growing through words of affirmation and just having that gratifying experience amongst themselves. When I first went to Harbour Hills this year to ask what residents would like to go, I met up with Faith and she found 3 people at first, and then about 20 showed up. And we filled an entire room. They showed up with their distinct voice and interest in their project. And they really could connect each other positively, form a social group in order to make this project possible. And then this project emphasized that, skipped a little, emphasized that people's interaction with garden spaces does not need to be the same. Although many residents were experts and had a long history of agriculture, it wasn't a barrier for participation if you didn't have that knowledge. It became an invitation. For example, one resident self-described their role as the water boy. He would make sure that all their plants were appropriately watered at the right time every single day. Another resident within our first year grew plants on behalf of somebody who could not grow the plants themselves because they were ill. And so that support system and that social network really builds up. As community gardens, there are always tasks to do and a way to connect. And so Cultivating Memories, I should highlight, this is the name of the project because, as I've said before, Huron County is a rich agricultural hub. So access to gardening was a chance for people to do what they've always done. And they may have a lot of memories and expertise from when they were younger come into play. For example, one woman described a story of her family always growing strawberries One man described that his wife and he worked together to cultivate a beautiful garden of flowers that you could see driving past his farm. And they were able to share some of the memories with each other as they worked in that garden space. And they were also able to cultivate new memories from this experience. One woman told the story of a butterfly landing on her hand, and then she was able to tell her family about it and say, hey, this is what I've been doing. These are the new memories that I'm forming from this experience. And I'm going to pause on the slide just for a second because we do have a video where we do interview the residents in more detail. So if you wanted to hear a little bit more of the stories, you can see our video from our website. And I'm not going to play the video for you now, but we're developing another one from this year. And I want to highlight other local examples of gardening opportunities because it's not just our project out here. There are a lot of other community organizations and individuals that work really hard in order to make our community wonderful. The Historic Gold Garden and the Museum Garden that Betty can speak on in greater detail are community gardens that grow food that is donated back into the community. The Huron County Libraries has a seed library based out of Exeter. Anyone that lives within Huron County can go to the library and get seeds for free to grow plants. And seeds might not be the most expensive part of gardening, but it can be the difference between somebody getting started. And then we also see that gardens maintained by other communities, such as gardens we see on the corner strip of the road that people put into effort into planting and maintaining. And recently I've learned about another community garden that has popped up. Community Living has begun an accessible garden, and they meet every Thursday morning, and all the harvested food goes back to community members that have participated or to community members that are not able to access that healthy fresh food. So there are a wide array of examples that actually exist in our community. So some next steps is Gateway has finished the Cultivating Memories project. However, we continue to write new grants to help other positive access to food within communities. And I look forward to really being able to see others like me also have the same opportunity to have a positive community impact. And thank you for listening to my lecture. I'm gonna now invite all the wonderful panelists really to speak on and answer any questions that have popped up in the chat. So I'm gonna stop my share.
Great, thanks, thanks, Sage. I'm Michele, and I am also a member of the board of directors for Gateway, but I split my time here in Goderich with between gardening and family and Gateway. And I am a master gardener with the Ontario Master Gardeners Group. But I started my master gardener trip a number of years ago in California. So moving from California back to my roots here in Huron County, botany and soil science is all the same, but the plants and the climate are different. So I'm getting my my education again here in Ontario. As a master gardener and being exposed to this endeavor, this initiative of cultivating memories is pretty impressive. I'm also a retired nurse, and the importance to bring quality education to the gardener is important. It doesn't always have to be formal, botany 101 from the University of Guelph. It can be, sharing the knowledge that has been cultivated over years of being on the farm and having, that knowledge of the soil in the home garden next to the house or in the fields, all the crops, and dealing with pests and weeds and stuff. When you get to that stage of life where you're not capable of physically doing all of that, and you find yourself moving to a new location, you don't lose that knowledge, and it is such a great gift to be able to share that with the other residents of the long-term care facilities or the retirement homes or other community members. Maybe you don't leave the farm and move into a smaller apartment. Maybe you just move to a house in town. And so you want to go out and you want to garden again. And so the community gardens offer that avenue to share that knowledge. And Betty is really well, is going to be able to speak very knowledgeably about the community gardens part. In California, I'm honored to be part of a community garden, which was less than an acre. And it really brought together a lot of different ethnic backgrounds and a lot of challenges and a lot of successes. And boy, don't you feel great when you can celebrate successes. So I think that's also one of the other lift me ups that happen from gardening, is you can see your benefits, see your efforts. And I guess that's kind of where I come from. The other part of the education component that I want to just plug there is, if you're going out and investing a lot of time in developing a new garden and you're going to go get some plants, I really encourage people to know the botanical name of the plant that you want. You don't have to know how to pronounce it, but when you're buying a plant, make sure you know that botanical name, because you might be getting one that is not like, there's black-eyed Susan is a great plant, but it can take a number of different forms if you don't know the botanical name that you're going to buy. I will put in a plug for the Master Gardeners. The Stratford and area Master Gardeners is our local chapter. Ontario has about 28 chapters. And if anyone is interested in pursuing and becoming a Master Gardener, contact the Stratford and area Master Gardeners, and we can send you the link or the email address if you want. Gateway will have it. And you too can share your, a passion for garden and botany and integrated pest management and all that kind of great stuff. So I'm open to any questions you might have.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ruby DeBrouwer. So I'm the recreation manager at Harbour Hills Retirement Suites here in Goderich. I had the pleasure of working on this project this summer alongside Sage and our residents, and it was phenomenal. There were so many benefits to it, and living in Huron County, we have so many farmers living in our building that they kind of got to go back to their roots, which was awesome. I worked for the town. I'm from Lucan, Ontario, and I worked for the township there, also working with some community gardens. So I had a bit of experience. But then I attended Brock University, gaining an undergraduate degree in community recreation, which also touched on some community gardens and the benefits to it. So it's been a great experience, and I've actually learned a lot about gardening through it.
I don't mean to interrupt, but Betty, I don't know if I don't hear you, and I don't know if anybody also doesn't hear you.
Well, Betty, just to, this is Jay. Beside your little microphone button, there's a little up arrow. If you click that, you'll be able to select your microphone. So just try a different microphone and see if that works.
Not yet, not yet. While you're doing that, Betty, can I answer one of the questions that was in the Q&A? Someone, David Whitting had asked, how do I keep rabbits away from peas and carrots? And as a Master Gardener, that's a great Master Gardener question. That's a barrier. You have to put up a barrier because they're part of our natural environment that want to eat as well. And when you've got nice, tender peas and carrots, they they go for it. But the good news is most rabbits will be kept out with about a 2-foot high chicken wire fencing around that. It won't keep the deer out.
So are you able to hear me at this time?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Sorry, I'm not very techy. So anyways, again, I'm a nurse. I'm still doing some nursing things. I grew up on a farm. On the farm, we were pretty self-reliant. You know, we had livestock and we grew vegetables and we depended on them. You know, they were kept so that we had vegetables over the over the winter. I guess growing up on a farm, sometimes you don't even know you're learning. There's no real lessons, you just learn. And sometimes people say, how did you know that or whatever? And it's just because, right? So I've always just loved gardening, whether it's flowers or vegetables. How the garden started at the jail and the museum was probably 7-8 years ago. I was a volunteer and I was helping out at the behind the bars. So I was working inside one of the courtyards. And we asked the museum staff, like, could we put in a vegetable garden, which would be similar to the gardens that would have been in the courtyards, late 1800s, early 1900s. And just so it kind of felt like, you know, there was something growing there that was alive. And they agreed. And we used some of the vegetables for props because the prisoners would have actually taken care of the garden, picked produce, and would have cooked with it. And what we noticed as volunteers, there was myself and Karen Lennon, we noticed that a lot of the children could not identify any of the vegetables. They didn't know what they were. They didn't know, you know, what the leaves were. And sometimes just kind of like just with chatting or just observing, when the children were there with their grandparents would often take them right down, you know, through the rows and say, this is whatever. And then sometimes their parents did not have a gardening experience, but they remember their mom and dad having a garden or their grandparents having a garden. So there was that kind of sharing of information, and also the fact that some people kind of had gotten away from it, right? And they kind of missed it, and you know, wouldn't it be nice if sort of thing. So what we did was we asked to have a second garden planted. So we planted the second garden, which was at the museum. And this garden is always visible, whereas the jail garden, you have to actually go in the jail to see it. So we wanted something very public. And whereas like the vegetables that were grown in the jail garden, they were based on the menu, the things that the prisoners actually ate at that time. The museum garden, we tended to just have a little bit of fun, and we would plant, you know, different types of vegetables and things that grew in different colors. And again, because it was open all the time, people can see it, they can walk around. And pre-COVID, we also had Saturday mornings where children could come. And depending on the stages of the garden, they would learn how to plant or weed or harvest, and also to put the garden to bed, like late fall. So it was like a really nice project. I think, you know, the children enjoyed it, the adults enjoyed it. The children knew that the food was going to a food bank, and they felt very good about that. And sometimes the parents or the grandparents would come and just stay, you know, outside the garden, just kind of, you know, they want to know what's happening in the garden. And again, it was a chance for them to say, oh, yeah, no, you know, that's rhubarb and whatever. And sometimes we would send things home to the kids so they could cook something with their parents or their grandparents, which maybe they'd never tasted before. The gardens, both gardens, you know, I find when I'm in them, it's very social. Very often people just stop and say, oh, you know, how are the radishes coming, or the strawberries done, that sort of thing. And it's kind of like an icebreaker, you know, and they'll share, again, their memories, you know, things that, you know, they recall from the time that they're very young, or things that they grew, or, you know, I think Michele just mentioned about the pests, right? You know, how they dealt with rabbits, and, you know, are the bugs bad this year, that sort of thing. So, but it's just like a lovely, lovely opportunity to have a social time with another person. And some of the people that are regular walkers in that area, they just want to see what's growing. You know, oh, look at how big that is, or oh, you know, the beans are gone, or you know, onions are all gone, and now we're down to carrots and carrots, tomatoes, and sweet peppers. So yeah, just kind of like tracking and seeing where things are at, and then when the garden is put to bed, then it's kind of the end of this season. This year, like I had really good success with garlic, so I'm going to put some garlic in for sure for next year. So that'll be my late fall planting. But yeah, it's just such a plus, you know, for myself, and I feel it's just a good thing for the community. So I'll leave you there. I feel like I'm talking too much, but again, you know, it's hard not to get carried away when you're really happy about something.
There are a couple of questions in the Q&A that I could jump in and answer if that's okay with you, Sage. Is that?
Yeah, if you want me to direct, or do you have a specific then? If you have a specific one, go ahead and answer.
All right. So I did, I saw here, yeah, Marguerite was wondering what else could she put? She's got a very large garden, a little bit larger than she can handle at this point, and wondered what else she could put in to use up that space that wasn't quite vegetables and no grass. And I'm going to say, get those pollinating flowers in there. That is a great use of your space, and hopefully not, if there's something growing on your soil, you're not going to have the weed pressure. So intentionally plant native pollinating plants, and your vegetables will appreciate it, and you won't have to give up that area to grass, which is a monoculture crop. But that would be my answer on that. I don't know if Betty, you had any other recommendations on that.
I think a lot of people are, you know, looking at native plants like pollinators, and the flower beds I have in front of my house are kind of considered like naturalized. So I just kind of plant things that are good for the bees or the hummingbirds, and I kind of let it decide where it wants to go. Some plants will kind of push out other plants or take over areas, and I spend very little time in my garden, in my flower gardens, just because it kind of controls itself. And again, it's something that doesn't take a lot of my time, but when I am in the garden, I really enjoy it. And people that walk by, they enjoy it as well. You know, it's nice to see monarchs floating around, and just the different color changes, you know, so you can look at whatever you do plant, you know, that they're blooming, you know, right from early spring right into late fall. And I always ask people to think about native plants that provide seed for birds over the winter. You know, things like cornflowers. Yeah, so just things like that, I think, are a good way of using like an area that maybe is too much now for a vegetable garden, but it can still be very beneficial in other ways.
Okay, just wanted to interrupt, and I wondered if Ruby wanted to tackle this one. You have touched on social and physical benefits of gardening, and I wondered, Ruby, if you could address the cognitive benefits of gardening for seniors or others.
Yeah, for sure. So through this project, I learned so much about the benefits that the gardens have had for our residents and for seniors in general. It's taken them back to when they had kids or when they were younger, and the stories they've been able to tell about their gardens have been outstanding. So we've had a few residents who have talked about the gardens they had growing up and the gardens they had with their parents. And then they've led through their lives with these gardens leading to when they owned their first home, the gardens they had there. Even if they became farmers, they kind of consider that sometimes gardening that they would do. And then it led into when they became seniors, when their kids had left the house, and then to here. So getting these garden beds has kind of, I'd say, gave them a little hint of their lives, what they've led through. And it's just been so positive. And even those who weren't directly in the gardens gardening all the time, there was constantly someone out at the gardens, whether they were walking around with their families, showing off what had been done, or if they were just out there looking. We had tons of strawberries this year, and they were definitely well sampled. There was tons. So tomatoes, strawberries, I think everyone got a taste of something if they were out there. So it was just such a positive thing for all of our residents to have here.
Thanks, Ruby. Can you think of any issues or challenges along the way?
Personally, I didn't have any, and I don't, not that I heard of any of our residents had any. We had a few that definitely took this project by the reins and they went for it, and I allowed them to go for it, and they were phenomenal. If I hadn't had those, I might have had to do a little more organizing, I guess, with the project. But our residents, we have about 130 residents now, and all of them who wanted to be involved got involved, and they did it. Like Sage had said at their previous projects, there was a water boy. We definitely had one of those. Everyone just took their job and they went with it, and I had no problems with it. But yeah, I think it was awesome.
If I can add, there's some studies going on. A fellow by the name of Keltmer, who was looking at the science, that the impact of the sense of awe and what a positive experience that is on your physical being. And I think in the garden, that is a tremendous experience. Sage mentioned the woman who, saw the butterfly that landed on her. I mean, that's something really simple in the garden. And sometimes when we're got a small residence, and to be able to get out to that raised bed and to be able to see that insect so closely and have that sense of awe, that's very good for the spirit and for the body. And that's so, Ruby, for you to be able to bring that to your residents is tremendous.
Yeah, and I do see one question in the Q&A about if I had any issues with residents wanting to plant more things than there was room for. I did have that problem. It seemed that when the word got out about the community gardens and everything started growing, there was a lot of residents who wanted to plant this or wanted to plant that. So our porches look wonderful because they all just got planted on their porches for their rooms. But next year we are actually looking at adding more gardens so that we can try to accommodate everything. I don't think there will ever be a point where we will be able to accommodate every plant that every resident wants. But we're going to try our best.
To kind of comment on what Ruby's actually saying is, when I did some interviews, one of the residents was actually talking about introducing as well trees. Like, the thing about is, when you've lived at, you want to make it accessible green space. So there's definitely the ability to control and define that green space is really an amazing thing that this project has given people, because as I said in the presentation, it can be incredibly hard to change when you move to these locations. Although, as Ruby said, there's a lot of support that goes on from the staff, and but having that ability to define that space really is positive, because then you're able to bring in all that wonderful passion and knowledge and say, oh, I can do this.
There is a question about vandalism, and I wouldn't really call it vandalism, but the garden just beside the museum, it has like I think it's a 3-foot fence, so most people pretty well step over that one, but sometimes it's kind of noticeable. Anything that's around the outside tends to be picked a little better, and I think people are just sampling, like they're not just filling a basket. I think they're just trying a tomato here or there. Sometimes when onions were planted right around like the one side, you could see where they had picked out an onion, right? And I thought maybe they just need an onion. And the strawberries, you could always see where the strawberries were picked, and some of that I think it's because they had some kiddie programs going on during strawberry season, and the rhubarb. People always seem to like the rhubarb, so I'll sometimes say to people, like, don't cut the rhubarb. It's really bad for the plant. Just, if you want the rhubarb, just pull it, right? And that's donated, but again, some people, they just want 5 or 6 stalks, like just enough to make like rhubarb muffins or something. So I wouldn't really call it vandalism. I think it's just sampling, or like just having a little taste, or someone wants maybe a grandchild to eat a fresh tomato or something. So yeah, not really a concern. If someone eats it, I'm happy.
So Betty, I wanted to ask you this question. How can community members get involved in local gardening projects or really show their support for what's going on?
Well, I think everybody could do good things, even in small ways. It doesn't always have to be physical. I find that some people, as they age, it's just a little more difficult to do things, but perhaps they have things they would like to donate and share. Maybe they've got tools, or big container like pots, that they can donate to a project. Yeah, just again, whatever you can do. And whenever I'm talking to people like in my area, or let's say I'm talking to members of the Horticultural Society, if I'm aware of a project going on, I'll share that information with them and say, you know what, maybe you're interested in this. When we had our garden tour in July, the Goderich Community Gardens, like right beside Goderich Place, they were featured. So we had, I'm thinking, almost 200 people go through our gardens on that tour date. So it was a really nice exposure because people said, I didn't even know it was here. I never go to this part of Goderich, right? And all of a sudden they were so impressed. It's like look at all these raised, look at all these like boxes, literally full of food, and they're all different, right? And they're different family names. So it's, oh, I know that family. Look like they're growing radishes or something. But I think even just supporting other projects that are going on, and just awareness, and because we have connections, right? Like I also try to help people with Community in Blooms projects. They help us. So it all kind of works together. And sometimes you have something that someone else can use, like maybe I have extra fencing or hoses, things that are really essential when you're starting out. Sharing your knowledge. I can remember just saying, 2 things that I think are just critical if you're starting a garden is fencing and a water supply, because otherwise you're going to be feeding the rabbits or your garden's going to dry out. So, yeah, and again, as far as resources, I always try to be available, or share what knowledge I do have. I'm not a master gardener. I'm just someone who grew up gardening. And even I learn something new every year. So again, it's an experience that just kind of keeps evolving, right? So yeah, and to be positive with gardens, I sometimes say to people, look and see what grows really well, like the things that are easy to start with. Like beans are usually pretty good, and you can do those in containers. Tomatoes are usually pretty good. I tell them just watch what kind of tomato you grow, so it doesn't become like an 8-footer. Maybe you just want something that you can keep on your patio. And again, like just little things like that, so that they have some success and start really small, and then you're more likely to expand it and think, okay, that was pretty good. Let's try peas next year, right? So yeah, so those are just little things that I feel can help someone, really have a nice little garden and decide to do it again next year and keep it going.
Betty, your produce, you said, was taken to the local food bank. I understand there are 2 fridges at the yoga den up on the square too, to help provide fresh produce for those in need. Do you supply those as well?
Well, what is happening right now? I've got 2 boxes of tomatoes on my table here. They're going out to the food banks this afternoon. Some of the tomatoes, if they have like little marks in them, and I call them stretch marks, like they're not really pretty tomatoes anymore, but there's nothing wrong with them. I have a friend that I've given those tomatoes to, and she's going to process them. She's going to make them into like tomato sauce or use them to make some kind of food. And then they're going to go to the refrigerators. I'm very happy to stock those with fresh vegetables as well. I just need to make a point of acquainting myself with them. I haven't gone into the to the business yet. I just need to take a few minutes and just figure out how I'm going to do that. But everybody likes a nice piece of fresh produce, right? So for sure, I feel it's appropriate to share, with those things as well.
So I was going to ask Ruby this. We've had a lot about gardening, but what's really the importance of like creating tailored recreation and activity spaces as part of the aging process?
It's super important. I see it every single day here at Harbour Hill. So we have tailored recreation programming every single day, 7 days a week, for our residents. We work on both cognitive functions, physical, and then we also go along with some fun things. We lead a very resident-focused approach. Every morning we start out with exercise, and our exercise classes actually overlook our gardens. So it's about 20 to 30 people supervising those gardens every single morning. And then in the afternoon, we lead multiple programs that range from things like Jeopardy or trivia that work cognitively. And then we also go to live music once a week. We have bus trips everywhere. And then we also just play some fun games for our residents. So it's super important. It gets people out of their rooms, and that's the biggest thing. We really try to be a social place. The more they talk to other people, the more they're out of their rooms, and that's always a win for me.
There's a question from Karen Lennon about the potato stack at the museum garden. So we've done something along that line for years. Sometimes we call it a potato tower. So it's actually above ground, so you don't need a lot of space. And so you just start the potatoes in some soil, and then you have some kind of an enclosure, and then you just keep adding more soil so that as the potato grows up, it throws out potatoes on the side. And I think there was one year we had a potato tower had like I don't know, like 120, 30 potatoes, and it was like crazy. This year, I have 2, I guess, what we could call potato stacks, and I haven't harvested them yet. So I'm just waiting for the plants to die back a bit. But I'll have to meet with Karen and just tell her how many potatoes we end up harvesting from that. But it's amazing. We did have potatoes in a row, and they've all been dug and given to the food banks. But potato towers are sometimes fun. And I can remember when the students were there was a program with the students. There was something fascinating about digging a potato out of the ground. It was like gold, and the funny thing was the variety of potato was Yukon Gold, right? So anyways, the kids really enjoyed it, and the adults really again had good fun with it as well.
Can I answer? David Whitting has asked in the Q&A about pressure treated wood for the garden boards and fencing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sage, but I believe the ones that were constructed last year and this year for the residents were used untreated wood, and using a wood that is going to be durable enough to withstand the exposure to both the soil and the wetness and the seasons for a couple of years is going to be a good investment. Pressure treated wood is not advisable because of the potential uptake of those treatments into the roots. It's not as much of an issue now. They've changed the element that they use to treat pressure treated woods, but you really shouldn't use it. And if you have questionable wood, it's always a good idea then to line the bed with another impermeable fabric that would reduce the likelihood of that treated wood. I just wouldn't use it. That's my answer.
Thank you, Michele.
Nancy's
I know
back.
you were the one to answer that one. All right. Thank you, Sage, and panelists Betty, Michele, and Ruby for all your information and creating an important conversation which highlights the benefits of gardening in general, social, cognitive, physical. I find gardening just so rewarding, therapeutic, and empowering. So thank you for your comments. See, I need to say a huge thank you to our sponsors for their continued support. Without them, the lecture series would not be possible. So they include, thank you, Microwave Basics, Goderich Legion Branch 109, Libro Credit Union, Zares Goderich, Huron County, McEwen Fagan Insurance Brokers, Lighthouse Money Management, and McGee Motors. Thank you. Gateway Center of Excellence in Rural Health is a not-for-profit organization with charitable status. We greatly appreciate and welcome the support we receive. If you would like to donate to Gateway in support of the lecture series or other activities that Gateway undertakes, I encourage you to visit the Goderich website Gateway website and click on the donate button. To learn more about Gateway's rural health research projects and other programs or activities, or view any missed lecture series sessions, because they're all placed in recordings on our website, go to gatewayruralhealth.ca. We also have lovely high-quality Gateway branded merchandise and clothing as one of our fundraising endeavors. So while you're on the website, you might check out our store. Thanks again for all of you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the next lecture series on Tuesday, October the 3rd at noon, when John Brown and Luella Vaughn will be speaking about acute care centralization and what evidence really tells us. We hope you'll pass along the lecture series information to your networks, as our goal is to expand the reach of this lecture series with the aim of promoting knowledge economy and supporting Gateway's mission of improving the health and quality of life of rural residents. So see you next month, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, and happy gardening.